Now, welcome. Hello, Stephanie, Katya, Mary, and I'm sure that we will have a few more people joining us in the next couple of minutes as well. So welcome to what you didn't know is the final Womancraft Book Club. Um, so the Womancraft Book Club has been running for, I'd say 2 years now, maybe 2.5 years. And we have gone through our entire backlist of authors. We haven't gone through all our books because if we did just my books or just Sarah's, would be here a few years. So every author has had a chance. And it's been a really special way to gather together and to deep dive into our favorite Womancraft titles and to hear from the authors and really kind of for you to get to know them, to hear their words in their own voices and to hear a bit about the behind the scenes process of what it was to create the book that you have and love. So it's bittersweet. It feels like, phew, we've managed to get through them all, and sad that it's not going to be continuing in this form. However, you know us, we metamorphose all the time. So we're having a dreaming session of the Womancraft authors, I think next week, to dream up what comes next, because book clubs are really popular and people love being able to connect with the authors. So we're going to find another way for that to happen. So with that said, welcome to the Red Tents Book Club. So we have Aisha Hannibal and we have Marianne Clements. Oh, well done, Mary. So really lovely to have the two authors of Red Tents here. And this is our only duo. No, Sarah and I duoed after you, but our only duo author team. We have an artist and author team. We have an author and scribe team, but you were the first, the original duo author team. So it would be interesting to later on in the session just reflect on how it is to write a book together, because normally writing a book is a very lonely process. So I'd love for you, Aisha, just to start us off with a little bit from the beginning of the book to draw us into the Red Tent.
Right, well, we're going to start at the beginning where we welcome people in, and it feels appropriate now as we begin this book club together. So handing over to Marianne.
Yeah. So welcome. We are so glad that you're here with us. Thanks for showing up wherever you are today in your journey with Red Tents. Whether you run a Red Tent already, are just thinking about starting one, or reading this out of curiosity without any intention of running or participating in one. We want you to know that you're welcome and that we invite you to think about Red Tents as a place of welcome that can, with attention and commitment, be intentionally inclusive and accessible to your community. We invite you to share our vision and to travel with us, taking what is useful for you and letting go of the rest. Each Red Tent starts with women sitting in a circle, speaking their name and sharing a short introduction as to where they are right now and how they are. And so that is also how we would like to open this book. So hi, I'm Marianne. The first Red Tent I went to was a gathering of many women. Some I already knew well, others I didn't. When I arrived, I was invited into a simple circle of women sitting in a small wooden building with a candle in the middle. There were a few red things in the room to indicate a space prepared for us and a simple, quiet, warm place to be together. To be ourselves, to connect. I was welcomed. I felt shy and nervous, but strangely, not quite so alone as I normally might have at that time in a group of women. We'd each brought food to share and there were warm drinks to welcome us. There was something in the space that calmed me and kept me from running away. And as women shared of themselves and what had brought them there, I began to see myself reflected back. My story echoed. Later in the day, during that red tent, I slept and found myself able to truly rest in a way I hadn't been able to in months. It was 2009, sorry, long time ago, right? And it was a time in my life where it felt like everything was falling apart. Red tent spaces held me during that time and punctuated my month like a great big out breath where I could relax and let go of the multiple challenges I was holding. Being able to share at least some of what I was going through with a group of women helped not just sustain and support me, but also eventually to see my way through to making changes. Because seeing and hearing myself in other women's experiences helped me to know on a cellular level that's hard to explain, that although my circumstances were particular to me, the patterns and narratives woven through them were also in some way shared. I was not alone. I had sisters who had these experiences, had walked these paths, known this grief, this anger, this wrestling, or at least had known something like it. We were kin. And so it was in the deepest moments of despair in my life that I finally found myself reaching for communities of women, and that I too found myself coming home.
I'm Aisha. I always get a tingle when I sit down in a red tent and think about a woman doing the very same thing in another place, feeling connected through this act. This simple way of making time for myself, sharing and enjoying time with other women. As a child and a teenager, I witnessed how women were objectified, vilified and disregarded. I saw it in my own family, on television, in the ways men treated me. I felt on some level that being a woman was dangerous, weak, or full of risk without reward. Over the years, I began to examine this position with a softer gaze. I started making more female friends. I wanted to hear the rich array of stories that made up other people's lives and to allow wider appreciation to ignite my hope for a more celebrated image of women in the future. Even with some wonderful female friends in my life, the first time I went to a red tent, I was full to the brim with fear. My heart was beating louder than my thoughts. I felt like an imposter rocking on a precipice of something exciting. I knew this feeling well, as I often purposefully move towards things that scare me, leaning into the combined forces of curiosity and terror. I wanted to spend time with other women, although the whole idea of being fully embracing myself as a woman and being vulnerable with them made me recoil. After my first red tent, I got it. I found something more real than the fear and doubt. I found some sense of connection and acceptance, both within myself and with others. I felt passionate about sharing it. I felt the welcome of women to be themselves was something that was missing in society and therefore in countless other women's lives. A year later, I found some women who lived near me who were up for starting a red tent. It grew and flourished and took on a life of its own.
Thank you. So lovely to hear your introductions in your own voices. And now tell me, for those who might be watching this, who perhaps haven't read the book yet and are just curious, they've just, searched something and come here, found this. What's a red tent? What's a red tent and where does it come from?
So, yeah, our experience is with red tents, but red tents are basically intentional communities set up for women, and that's inclusive, cis women, trans women, non-binary people. It's a safe space, or a safer space than they may experience in society, as an opportunity to nourish and replenish themselves after all the ways that we can give out in our lives to work, family, friends, all the different kind of places we show up. So red tents are almost what we talk about as them being like a practice ground for learning new things, trying out ways of communicating, being vulnerable, finding strength and bravery together. And so that we can be more present in the world to address the inequalities and the issues that we see. That's kind of our interpretation of red tents, but they're very much formed depending on the needs of the community. So it might look very differently if you find one locally to you.
Where does the term come from? Because they don't usually happen in a tent, right? Because people might be, certainly when I was looking for images for the cover, you know, I put in red tents and I get these whole bunch of kind of, you know, red bell tents and people wanting to go camping, and that's not what red tents are, right?
Well, the cover of the book actually was all about that, because we wanted people to feel like you could have a red tent wherever you lived, and we see pop-up red tents happening in parks. They can be, you know, on the land or in a flat or wherever. So we wanted to make it feel really kind of tangible that anyone could create one wherever they were.
And so sorry, Marianne, go.
No, I wanted to hear your question. I think it might have been similar to what I was going to say, but what I can add if you ask. Go ahead.
Is just the kind of historical background of where did the term come from?
Yeah, I think we go into it quite a lot in the book, but basically, many people might know that there is a book called The Red Tent by Anita Diamond, which is it's a fictional book about biblical times, women who would have, there was women's community basically in the tents in that story, and they are in actual tents in that story. And I think the term partly comes from people having associated the idea of women creating these spaces together to nourish and support themselves from that book, but also from loads of different ways in which women around the world have gathered in these sorts of ways over like centuries to support one another, to build community, to take care of themselves. So yeah, we spent quite a lot of time when we were writing the book, like researching and trying to make sure that there wasn't like one origin of the term. And in a way, there isn't. If you read the book, you'll learn more. But effectively, they're women's circle spaces that are really about nourishing women in community coming together. And we'll talk about it a bit, I'm sure, later in the call as well. But yeah, they like as Aisha said, they can be formed anywhere, and there are people doing them in all kinds of different ways, and often not in tents, but occasionally in tents.
Yeah, my very first red tent I went to, well, red tent space, was at a festival, and it was a yurt which was decorated in sumptuous, you know, cushions and throws, and it was just a lovely retreat space for women with just a little altar space, a few books, and just a quiet place to get away from the hubbub. And there was, you know, just one or two women just minding that space and minding the women who went into it. And then I was very fortunate to sleep in the original Red Tent Temple. There were a couple of kind of movements that started at a very similar time, and Elisa Starkweather started the Red Tent Temple movement, and we are very fortunate. We are all friendly with Elisa, and she very kindly wrote the foreword to the book, which was an enormous blessing for us. And I was so fortunate to sleep in her Red Tent Temple when I went to her Daughters of the Earth festival, and that was very magical and a little scary, because apparently there was a bear prowling around for the very first time ever that night, and hers is kind of on the edge of the woodland, so it was scary, but very sacred just to be in this space. It's like being in a church. You can just feel what has gone on, all of the hearts that have been opened in that place, the community that's been forged, and you can feel it in the walls. So I'd love to find out how can you remember when you first heard of red tents, or how you first discovered them? And what was your initial response to that? Like, was it like, oh yes, or was it oh, I'm not sure about that, or?
I actually first heard about them from Elisa as well. So I met her in the UK, and I think, well, I said, didn't I? It was 2009, I think. So I actually first heard about them from her as well. And I remember just sort of thinking, it sounded sort of unusual but nice, and I wanted to give it, like, I think that's where I was. But it was definitely at that time in my life something that seemed sort of new and different to me from the sort of spaces that I'd been in before. So yeah, I was intrigued, curious, but also a bit like where Aisha says in her passage, also like, what is this type of, you know? I
I
think.
think in the US there was a real culture in the 70s, especially, of consciousness raising groups with feminist women, and that kind of has stayed and evolved in the consciousness, whereas I'm not sure there was that much of that in the UK and Ireland. And so my feeling is that it's quite fresh and new for us here in a way that it isn't as much in the US. I could be wrong, but that is my sense of it. Certainly when I was writing my first book, Moontime, I came across red tents for the first time. Little passage in one kind of website or something, and I was like, wow, what's this? Never heard of that before. And it was very much kind of going through the internet and trying to get all the information I could. And that's when I came across Elisa, because it was like she had a whole bits dedicated to it on her website, and I was like, oh wow. But there really wasn't much information about that, and that would have been 2010, 2011. And like Moontime, as far as I'm aware, was the first book that was actually mentioning these. So it's ridiculous how far we've come in 13 years, that most women who will be listening to this call have heard of red tents, even if they've never been to one. So it's a huge, like, really fast growth in them. How did you first come across them, Aisha?
Yeah, similar. I mean, Marianne and I have been friends for a long time, and we were both involved in working with women. I was working in domestic abuse services, and Marianne had said, if you really want to hear about women and support women, come together to these other groups of women who are kind of forming like resilient community. So I also went to a red tent, and I think that for me, the idea of having somewhere where you would rest together, to, like, we talk about nourishment, and actually I think that we're in a society that really values productivity and always being on the go, and very much kind of a lot of kind of traditional roles of women being in kind of servitude. So the idea of actually being like witnessed and sharing in that together, and looking after yourselves, felt quite a challenge for me, because it's actually something that I felt a bit ashamed about, that I had to always be looking after people to kind of demonstrate my value. So it was already a challenge. There were so many things that were new to me, but that felt like a challenge. And then furthermore, actually talking about how you really were felt brave.
So how did you move from going to your first red tent spaces to creating the red tent directory to writing the book on it? What was that journey, and how fast was that journey?
I think for me, I felt like as soon as I experienced the red tent, like I said in my opening, I just felt like I wanted this to be available to as many women possible. And I felt like, a bit like you just said there, that actually there wasn't that much kind of being spoken about it. So I thought, oh, it's going to be this thing that's like really niche, that if you know someone, then you get to go. I thought, well, actually, this is something that could be really important in people's lives. A lot of people, including myself, have felt isolated and lonely. And why should only the people that know the right connections hear about this? So it was in conversations with Marianne that we were like, okay, what skills do we have? What can we bring to this? We've both worked in the NGO sector for many years and have done various things, done a lot of different things, haven't we, Marianne? So we were like, okay, Marianne could build a website. And we just started putting the call out and asking people to get in touch, and it grew from having 6 to 200 plus in about 6 years.
Wow.
And you also flatter me as if we had the idea together, because really you had the idea and you said to a group of people that we both know, does anyone know how to build a website? And I just quit my job, like got divorced, like I just have one of those moments in life where like everything kind of, you know, changes. And I taught myself to build a website because I was trying to like get business as a consultant. So literally I'd just gone online and learned how to build a website. And I went, oh, I could do that. I think I could do it. But you know, I did, you know, your passion for sharing the idea with lots of people was infectious, you know. So I think really the directory was your idea, but it was a brilliant idea. I think other people had sort of similar ideas, but not create it in a way that people could just submit their listings from anywhere and it could kind of snowball. So it was a beautiful thing, yeah.
So that's how I came across you guys, because we started a red tent here in Ireland. I think it was probably the first one, certainly the first one down in the southern part. And yeah, so I don't even know how I came across you guys, but I did. I came across you and I was like, right, we'll list us there so that other people can find us. So that's how our paths crossed. So then how did you move from the directory to a book?
Yeah. Shall I say a bit about that, Aisha? Is that
Yeah,
okay?
please.
Yeah. So I think so for most of those 6 years, there was a lot of like admin involved, and Aisha did a lot of chatting to people about how their red tent was going, or people would call or they would email initially and say, I want to start a red tent, but I don't know how. Or they would say, I've started a red tent, but like I don't know how to keep it going. Or they would say, well, my red tent, but actually I've got a problem and I don't know how to sort it out. Or, you know, there were all these sort of practical things. And actually I used to do a lot of that responding to people. But at the same time, because we were working together on the project and I was also supporting with the admin and everything, we could see that there was sort of a need for the sharing of not just the list of tents and where you could go, but actually a bit more like how to. And so we started talking about, could we write this up? What else do we put on the website? And increasingly we thought actually maybe there's a book. And I think what really spurred us onto it was realizing that actually because there wasn't anything, some of the problems that were coming up was because people hadn't had like the thinking that we'd started to develop about the things that could go wrong. The ways to make spaces inclusive, the ways to think about them being this, what we talk about, liberatory space and community in the book, and how things could go wrong if you didn't do that. And that lots of people were setting these things up without having that knowledge, and that actually there was something that we'd collected really just by facilitating this listing that was kind of knowledge that actually we wanted to kind of give back to people rather than just sort of sit on and chat about, although that was obviously fun. And I
But like
think
there is literally no point in people reinventing the wheel every time when there is a lot of wisdom that has been accrued and a lot of experience that has been had. And what I love about the book is that you went out to your communities that you're aware of. You went out to all the red tent people that you know and you said, share your wisdom with us. What do people need to know? What have your experiences been, the good, the bad, the ugly? And that's why it's just such a valuable book, because there is so much wisdom in it.
yeah, exactly. And you know, a good deal of it isn't ours, and there are other people on this call that contributed to that book, and there are loads of people that aren't on this call too. Can't remember now, but there are, can you remember how many? There's a lot.
It's about 70 plus people that we spoke to. And I was reading it again recently. I was really struck by how many voices are come through. And I think that was really important in us in the writing, was that we've learned various things, but actually it's about like peer-to-peer knowledge and sharing people's experiences, and also to demonstrate that there isn't one way of doing something, and that people, there might be different voices that aren't in agreement, and we think that that's a great thing, that having that complexity and that richness. And I think that a lot of it was us talking to people about, like, hold steady, be brave. And it felt like that message was something that would be valuable to share. And it was Marianne who said, why don't we write a book? So and we did it together, and which I think, as you said, is quite an unusual thing to do.
So do tell me about that process of writing together, because I was telling my daughter that we had this call coming up, and she was like, how do two people write a book together? She just couldn't even get her head around that. So tell us, how do two people write a book together?
Well, and how do two people write a book together who don't live in the same locality, who work full time, who have families? Like, there's a lot of kind of how, but I'd like to hear from Marianne on this, but just wanted to say that for me, we were writing this book about collective leadership, about sharing knowledge, about learning as you go. And actually, that's how we wrote the book. And so we felt like we were almost learning more about what we were writing about by actually, like, doing that kind of joint facilitation together, and agreeing and disagreeing and discussing things and leaning into discomfort and challenging each other. And all of that actually, I think, made the book a much better book than I could have written by myself, for sure. But it also, we were testing out what we were talking about.
Well, and how do you write a book like that? A lot of voice notes, a lot of Google Docs, a lot of, you know, like discussions about, should we use that word or that word, which now have completely evaporated from my mind and I have no idea what they were, but there definitely were a lot of them. And a little bit of, let me take this chapter and get something down so that we can both respond to it as well, which I think is probably always part of the book writing process. Like, you get that, what does Annie Lamont calls it, a shitty first draft, right? Am I allowed to say that? Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that. So maybe one of us would do that, and then we would have something to work with, and we could work with it together through with these things. And it was also COVID at the end, wasn't it? And
Jesus, yeah, the
even more voice notes.
Yeah, the proofreading and the editing process with, like, we had kids at home and everybody was stressed up to their eyeballs, working from home, kids at home. The world was on meltdown around us. Trying to get a flipping book out into the world was hair raising.
A little bit hair raising.
Yeah.
Is it not always hair raising, Lucy?
No.
Oh, sorry.
No. It was a unique experience.
I think I didn't know that. I just thought it was always hair raising.
No.
I think it maybe is just everything around me is always hair raising.
Okay. Yeah, no, it was a very special point in time. And we had another book that had an almighty campaign against it, and it was that time as well. Everyone was at home, stir crazy, no outlet for their energy, and I know, let's go cause chaos on the internet, so yeah, it was weird times.
It was a weird time, that's true, yeah.
And it was also strange, bearing in mind what the content of the book was about, which was getting people together in rooms, and suddenly you couldn't do that, and we didn't know for how long that was going to happen. So suddenly there was this kind of thing about, people were having to explore, how do you keep a community going when you can't physically be together? And my memory is a bit of that made it into the book, because we were suddenly having to rethink everything with, like, if this goes on indefinitely, if we can't get together in people's living rooms, if you're having to keep 2 meters apart and wear a mask and only meet 2 people that you in your circle, then how do you do this? How do you connect? And so I think that made it a richer book, because it made you really have to think outside the box of what, you thought you knew what you were writing about because you'd had experience of that, and suddenly the world changed, and you had to write about all of that as well.
Yeah, and what we were writing about was about creating resilient community. And I think that there was a lot of demonstrations of how that was happening at the time, which was really inspiring. And I think that also we were kind of writing from that place of how valuable connection is and how do we find our ways back to each other. But I think that also speaks to when you don't have connection, how do you ever begin to even bring that into your life? So for me, I had postnatal depression when I was writing this book. I just had my second child, and I was right at my edges. But actually, I felt like it worked so well because I think when you're at your edges, you're like, you know, anything's a challenge because life is a challenge right now. And so I felt like I was able to kind of draw from like where I was kind of in my own like mental health, with like connect with other people that are also struggling, feeling on the edges themselves. And so our book is really a celebration of what does inclusive spaces look like, and why is that important, and why do we need to start with that question as the first question and then design from there.
I think that's a really important point that I just want to kind of beef up just a little bit more, which is that when we often think about creating community or being in community, we tend to think of it as being with people like us, and us being our best selves, and them being their best selves, and us all being our best selves together. And the reality is, we might only be our best selves for 5 or 10% of our days. The rest of the time, we're tired, we're overwhelmed, we're dealing with anxiety or depression or too much at work or whatever it is. And so we bring that with us to any space that we're a part of. We bring that into the community. And so if you've got all of these people bringing all of their stuff, that's a lot of stuff that's in the room as well as just you. And however much you want to show up as your best self, chances are you probably won't. And the other point of a red tent is that you're not masking, you're not pretending that everything's fine. So, you know, there is a real challenge there, because as a culture, we don't model how to do that. We tell people, smile, be nice, end of story. And so to create a real space where real people can show up as they really are is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that came, I think, more important to us as we wrote the book was to reflect that as honestly as we could. So was to have the sections further in that do talk about resolving conflict. And in that way, for me, it also became, like Aisha said, it's a book about building inclusive, and we talk about liberatory spaces. But what that actually means, like you say, is not fluffy and nice all the time. It's actually being ready for where it isn't and what you do when it isn't. And I think that really is in the spirit of Red Tents, because like you say, it's like if you show up in your full self the way you actually are, then actually it's not always going to feel, you know, fluffy. It's actually going to feel raw, and it's going to feel real, and it's going to feel brave, and it's going to feel, you know, and so that's also part of why one of the important things in the book, I think, is around the structures that you create to make it possible for all that to actually happen, rather than just be a nice idea. Yeah, so I think, yeah, it's good that you brought that up, because I think that became more and more important to us through the writing of the book. Like, we've got to say this stuff, you know, we can't just write something that makes it sound like it's easy and nice you know.
My experience of, I mean, a red tent, a women's circle is like a marriage. It takes work, and there's lots of lovely bits, but there's also bits where you have to agree your ground rules and your boundaries, and neither of you usually like the look of each other, and you know, and you carry on and you do all the housework, and then you know you try and make things more cohesive and more wonderful and better again. But there are moments where it is just housekeeping or just keeping the roof above your heads so that you can get into the next stage of connection and relationship. And that is not a skill that a lot of us learn through being parented and learning how to sustain connections when things get hard. And especially with people that we don't know very well, that can be really challenging because there's so many dynamics there. So I would love to just invite questions from any of our attendees, just so that we make sure we have plenty of time for them. And sometimes everybody wants to ask questions, and I'm scared that we're going to be running over, and sometimes nobody wants to ask a question, and it's a bit awkward when we all sit here and look at each other for a minute or two. So please unmute yourself. Oh, hello, Stephanie. Oh, Stephanie, I can't hear you. You've unmuted yourself, but I can't hear you. No. Do you have like a microphone sound or something that you need to turn up? No. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. An idea has struck.
Please feel free to put it in the chat if that's easier.
Yeah. Okay, we'll faff and come back. Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. And yeah, please do type it out if the sound doesn't work, and you can submit your question that way. And now I'm just staring at everybody else. Yeah, go Mads. Hi.
So one thing, I just wonder what you think about the best way of like handing over like leadership power. Like, so I've kind of formed a circle recently, and quite realizing that I'm taking the lead. And now everyone expects me to like say the things and do the things, and probably even if they want to bring the things, they won't bring the things. And then maybe if they do, I'll be like a bit like, oh, I'm not sure I like the way that's happening. But I would quite like other people to, but I'm also like conscious that they're being held, and that it might be harder for them to hold the circle than it is for me. So I don't want to bear weight on, because it's quite a sensitive circle. Yeah, so what did you find out? What's your wisdom on sharing leadership within circle and how that works best?
Yeah, thank you. It's a really good question, and it's come up a lot. And one of the things that we've found with creating community is that if you don't actively try to do things differently, you will end up replicating some of the oppression within society. So what we would see quite frequently in red tents is that there would be a lot of lone leadership, and that would lead to burnout, and then that would lead to kind of like the instability of that red tent going forward. Now, that wasn't anything to do with how much people valued those spaces, but it was it was about so many things, about the confidence to step up, which again was why we wrote the book. We wanted to almost hold people's hands and go, look, we didn't know how to do this stuff either. We've learned, come with us and we'll show you what we know. But there's a whole chapter about leadership, and what we wanted to talk about is, what does shared leadership look like, and what models of leadership can we draw from, where we have leading from the side or leading from behind. So there's lots of different ways people can join in that leadership who might not naturally kind of find themselves to be the person that wants to be most vocal, or that feels confident or feels like they have the knowledge and the skills. So we tried to kind of split out what that could look like. So there's elements where you can hand over part of that leadership and develop people as you go. And I think there's that, you can try this out and I can support you in this way. What does it look like for you? what are your fears, what might happen, just almost talking that through. But we see it a lot within red tents, and I think that was why we wanted to write more of a how-to guide rather than a aren't these wonderful things that, you know, are available. But Marianne, I know you wrote a lot in that particular
Well, I did, but
chapter.
it's still, I still think it's hard.
Yeah.
Even though, and I think it's like you say, it's because we sometimes replicate what we see around us, but also it's not just like you say, Mads, like if you're holding the space and feeling that replicates it, but it's other people as well.
Yeah.
And I think often that is what happens. And one of the things we say in the book is, you know, think about starting it with someone else, which is obviously, you know, if you're still starting something, like actually finding the right person or right 2 or 3 people first, so that you start by sharing the load. I think that's one solution for it, is where you know, you share the load from the beginning. But the other, like Aisha was saying, is to invite people in and let go a bit. And like you said, the letting go can be hard too, right? And we don't have enough models of how you share leadership, and it's hard because we don't, and because it is also, people are also sometimes hard. Right. Yeah.
And I also, there's a lot in the book about like it's okay to make mistakes, and I think that again we live within a culture where there's a lot of pressure to do things well, and then if they don't go well, then, you know, that's either your fault or it's not working, and therefore, you know, can't continue. So there's a lot of like gentleness around like, we're going to make mistakes, we're going to mess it up, we're going to get things wrong, but actually we're going to embrace that, because that's what happens when you come into community, when you're in contact with people. So we're going to make mistakes, and then we're going to address them, and we do a whole section on like, what do you do when? Because I think that is what resilience comes from, doesn't it? Because you're learning about yourself, about other people, and you're just allowing people to learn as you go, and a lot of unlearning happens as part of that too, which is so important.
Thank
I'm
you.
gonna buy them all a copy for Christmas. So that's my new plan.
Do you know though, that is kind of how we wrote the book, is we're like, right, you read that chapter and then honestly give it a go. And I think that's, yeah, we're hoping that people do get enough from the book to be able to just do something, because, you know, if you don't try it, then you don't really know. And it's a warm audience, right? Because people are saying, we really want this is important to us, so yeah, please learn with us.
And I mean, that's, you know, ever since establishing Womancraft, I had on my want list a book on women's circles or red tents, because I'd come across one lovely one in the US, and that was it. And I was like, how can that be it? Like, I want to know how to do it. And so I had to figure it out from, you know, the bits and pieces I could find. And then I was just like learning with no kind of wisdom or support helping me. And I knew I wasn't the only one doing that. And just to have a handbook that has all this information, all this wisdom, all this experience, all these voices in there does mean you're not having to, you know, remake the wheel from scratch. It just is such a reassurance to have knowledge there. Great question come in from Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie. If there was a chance to add another chapter to the book with hindsight or with reflection on how the world has changed since you finished the book, what would you try to include now? Oh, I love that.
Just the one chapter, is it? Can I answer? Well, I'll begin answering it, but I'm not sure I'm there yet. What I actually have found for myself with this book is that I have begun to embed a lot of what we say in the book into my life. I feel like we talked a lot in the beginning of the book, we talk about it all starts with you, that before you begin to offer something out into your community, think about what do you need in your life? Like, how can you learn how to look after yourself? And I think, when I was rereading the book, I read that chapter and I was like, yeah, that's like a whole life's work, isn't it? Like, and I feel like for me, we could have talked more about that, because it's been I've changed my life a lot since writing this book. I think that a lot of things came into sharper focus, and we talk a lot about red tents or women's circles, or, you know, resilient community is about breaking the silence between each other. And I've kind of done that in my life in recent years. And that has led to me being able to look after myself and understand what that is, and kind of let go some of the shame around it. So yeah, I just feel like we put it in one chapter, and I think that, wow, it's a challenge to look at the burnout culture that we have, that's so supported in society, to look at kind of abusive relationships, to look at kind of toxic, complex family dynamics, like all of that, you know, sort all of that out, and then offer out a really, you know, beautiful community space. So I just feel like there was more that we could explore in that part, that certainly for me, I've learned a lot from the book in recent years.
Thank you. Marianne?
I don't know. I love what Aisha said, but I also had this part of me that was like, when she was saying it, that was a bit like, yeah, but when by the time I perfectly care for myself, I'll, you know, be, you know, probably, you know, not here anymore, because like you said, it's a lifetime's work. So like, where do I still start and still experiment? So I think for me, I love that, but maybe also, I don't know if I'd add something about experimenting and a bit more around that. And but I'm saying that for something to answer, but in many ways I feel like also in the process of writing, we felt like we'd kind of collected the wisdom that was there at that moment. And I think books are like this sometimes, right? And we'd kind of shared it in a way that felt authentic to that moment. And I almost feel like I wouldn't want to touch it. I know people sometimes do go back and redo, but almost like that's it. And it would be more like a slightly different book, which might be for me like something, because I'm like working in an organization at the moment, about how some of those things might thread through, for example, like in an organization or a different context from a red tent as such. Because like a lot of the themes, like I've been saying, they're not just about red tents, although they are about them, but they're also about how do you do these things in other parts of your life, you know? So I could sort of see writing something that talks about, you know, how do you do some of this stuff well in an organization or a different kind of community, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And I actually think that like your question is kind of the question that we wanted to end the book with, because like I say in my checkout, that we hoped with writing this book that we created a place of hope. And that hope, this hope, the hope I have now passes to you. And for us, really, we were like you say, Marianne, it was of a time, it was based on the voices that were coming forward and our own knowledge and experience. But it was like, we hand this over. Like we're not involved in this way, but you are, and we want you to take this forward. And we also talked about, when we'd finished writing it, of like, I really want to know, like in 10, 20 years, I want to go, what's going on? Like, what kind of red tents are happening? What have people formed? I hope that there is many within one place, all responding to the kind of like intersectional complex needs and desires and wants of those communities, and they're showing up in all different ways. And, you know, and I see a lot of kind of grief circles that have set up, or like you know, activity-based circles. I've set up a walking group for women. And so, yeah, like go forth, like tell us what you know. Like maybe someone else will write a book about all those future chapters, and I'd love to read it.
So I'd love, in the spirit of the book, to kind of finish with a checkout from each of you, just to, you know, just a reflection on responses you've had to the book and where red tents are going, where they are right now, because I mean that we're now kind of 4 years down the road kind of thing. So it's I'm curious to know what the land looks like now in your own lives and with red tents.
Well, I kind of brought like a reader response as well that was shared with us. And yeah, it was someone from another country that had shared this quite recently from when we published it. And they said, I'm truly in awe of what you've created. You've made something wonderful. Reading this felt like getting a hug, and I'm inspired to rededicate and rethink what I want to bring into my community. And I feel like we wanted to write it. We wanted to write something that was quite challenging and saying, you know, it's not always easy. And if it feels uncomfortable, it doesn't mean it's the wrong path, you know, but like hold steady and we're with you. And so when someone said they felt like a hug, I felt like, oh, maybe we got the tone right. Because we wanted people to feel encouraged to do their own thing and also supported. So I don't know if I know the answer to your question about what do red tents look like now. I'm involved in like community work and what communities look like now. And I use a lot of what we put in the book. I use it in my work all the time. But I'd love for other people perhaps here to tell us what red tents look like or their experience.
Yeah, hi, I'm happy to contribute. I was listening to your previous answers and it got me thinking that, and I think you addressed this in the book in chapter 2, but for me initially, I understood red tents as being nurturing spaces to come yourself and be supported. But more and more, the red tents I've been going to, it's become political. It's a group of women really discussing what's going on in society, in the world, and offering, you know, experiences and or things they've been using to, you know, make the house healthy, or movements they've joined and practices. And it's become almost militant, you know, and sharing articles and connecting as well on WhatsApp later on and sharing more and more to become empowered. And that's my experience of the red tent right now, is that it's more political and eco-feminist. But that's my one. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, Katia.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I love that. And because it's sort of coming in my mind that I wondered about that when Steph asked that question about how the world has changed. I was wondering about that, and I haven't so much experienced it myself. So I love that that's what you brought, because I feel, you know, we're at this moment where that feels like it really matters. And I think like red tents feel like a really good foundation actually for potentially for political work, for groups where that feels right for them, because you're building the right structures to make that work happen in a way that hopefully doesn't produce burnout and is able to work through conflict and all these things, right? You need that. And it sort of made me think as well, like Lucy, what you were saying about the consciousness raising circles of like the 70s and stuff, that it's almost like a full circle to that a little bit as well. Like, so yeah, I love that. That would be a dream to me, that there would be loads of circles. And but what I also feel is that we don't necessarily know. It's also here, you know, and we wrote the book to be like that anyone could do it anywhere, and therefore we don't have like, you know, We don't know. Could be all sorts happening that we don't know about. And I love that, but it also means we don't have all the answers, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, certainly something that we're doing here is we're launching our first Womancraft compendium, which is a bit like a red tent in a book. There's
Yeah.
80 voices from women all around the world who are putting their heads together. And, you know, like Katya is in it and Mary is in it. And very much along the lines of what Katya was saying, you know, kind of ecofeminism and activism, and what can we do when we put together our knowledge, our lived experience, our wisdom. How can we apply that to our own lives? How can we apply that to the culture that we're currently inhabiting? And how can we together create a new form of culture and community that is life affirming and life sustaining? So that's Weaving Our Way Beyond Patriarchy, which launches tomorrow, and it's exclusively from womancraftpublishing.com, which is quite unusual. Normally our books are available everywhere, but this is to celebrate 10 years of Womancraft. And so we wanted to make it exclusive to us. So it is. And there was so many wonderful contributions that there's going to be a second one next year, which is on women's circles specifically. So we're going to have lots more voices to add to the voices of the Red Tent and add to the voices of Weaving Our Way Beyond Patriarchy, to really try and bring all these minds and hearts together and focus that energy and that hope and that desire for change, so that people have got this information in their hands. They've got, you know, at the back of the books, we've got all the bios of all the people who've contributed. They've got their email addresses and their websites, and you can reach out to them and make friends and make plans. And that's what's needed. Words are great, but they have to be lived out. They have to be handbooks for how we can do things differently in our own lives. And so I really want to thank you both for writing what's been a really special book, I know, for an awful lot of people, that's helped build communities all around the world and support people when they were struggling in the nitty-gritty of interpersonal relationships and trying to navigate that. So thank you both very much. And as I said, this is our last Womancraft Book Club in this way, but there's loads on our YouTube channel. So if you've missed some, you can go back to the Womancraft YouTube channel and you can see all our different authors talking about their books, talking about why they wrote them, how they wrote them. And we're just so very, very honored to have such a diverse bunch of voices from all around the world writing about what they know and what they love. So thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Aisha. And thank you all for being here today. And hooray, last Womancraft Book Club.
Thanks so
Take
much,
care.
Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah.
And
Thank
everyone
you
else
for
being here.
coming.